The battlefield was quiet, save for the occasional hum of failing power grids and the crackle of shattered energy conduits. Clavessa Rose surveyed the carnage with the cold detachment of a predator. Around her lay the remnants of her enemies, mercenaries hired by the Crick Syndicate to protect their smuggling operations. The skirmish had lasted less than 20 minutes. The Thraxian warrior had barely broken a sweat. She stood over a massive bulkhead door, her towering frame cast in the pale green light of her battle armor's interface. The Thraxian design was a marvel of engineering, sleek, angular plates that pulsed faintly with the bioelectric energy of its wearer. Her helmet's HUD projected streams of alien glyphs across her vision, relaying environmental data and potential threats. The interface chimed, signaling an incoming transmission. Clavessa exhaled sharply, annoyed. She touched a gauntleted hand to the side of her helmet, opening the channel. "Row, report," barked a gravelly voice. It was Commander Valtheris, her superior back on the Thraxian dreadnought orbiting the moon. "The facility is secured. The human operatives were as incompetent as expected." Her voice was smooth and clipped, like polished steel. "Efficient as always," Valtheris replied. "Return to base. You have a new assignment." "I'll assume it's more challenging than this," she said dryly, stepping over a broken combat drone. There was a pause, a hesitation that Clavessa didn't like. "You'll be working alongside a human operative this time. The Galactic Allied Forces have requested joint operations for this mission." Clavessa stopped in her tracks. "No. This isn't negotiable, Row. The mission concerns the Arkenstone." For the first time in years, Clavessa felt her pulse quicken. The Arkenstone was a relic of unspeakable power, said to be capable of warping time and space. In the wrong hands, it could destroy entire systems. But even the gravity of that threat didn't soothe her distaste. "A human," she repeated, as if the word were toxic. "Yes, Lieutenant Ian Travers. You'll rendezvous with him at the Shadow Port on Friedel Station." Clavessa clenched her fists. "If this human jeopardizes the mission, I'll deal with him myself." Valtheris chuckled darkly. "I have no doubt. Good luck, Row. Valtheris out." The transmission cut, leaving Clavessa alone with the faint hum of her armor. She muttered something in Thraxian, a curse that didn't translate well into standard galactic. She hated humans. Their fragility, their arrogance, their incessant need to prove themselves superior despite their glaring inadequacies. But orders were orders. Friedel Station wasn't much to look at, even by Shadowport standards. The station hung in the orbit of a dim, dying star, its structure a chaotic web of rusting metal and flickering neon signs advertising everything from weapon mods to genetically modified pets. The air in the docking bay smelled faintly of ozone and spilled fuel. Clavessa disembarked her ship, her imposing figure drawing stares from the eclectic crowd of smugglers, mercenaries, and traders. She ignored them, her focus fixed on the mission ahead. At the agreed-upon meeting point, a dingy cantina tucked in the lower levels of the station, she spotted him. Ian Travers was seated at the bar, nursing a drink that glowed faintly blue. He was human, all right. Average height, wiry build, with a mop of dark hair that looked like it hadn't met a comb in days. He wore a patched-up flight jacket and a grin that was entirely too self-assured for someone in his position. He noticed her approach and raised his glass in greeting. "You must be Row," he said, his voice casual. "I gotta say, the Thraxian reputation for punctuality doesn't disappoint." Clavessa loomed over him, her voice flat. "You're late." Ian blinked. "Am I? By whose clock?" He tapped his wrist communicator. "I mean, standard galactic time can vary depending on gravitational fields, orbital decay." "Do not waste my time with excuses, human," she interrupted. "Right, sorry," Ian said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Can I buy you a drink to make up for it?" Clavessa stared at him, unimpressed. "Thraxians do not consume human beverages." "Your loss," Ian replied, taking a sip of his glowing concoction. This stuff is probably toxic to you anyway. It's barely safe for me. She resisted the urge to roll her eyes and instead focused on the task at hand. The Arkenstone. What do you know? Ian leaned back in his chair, his grin fading slightly. Enough to know we're in over our heads. The faction that has it, they're not your run-of-the-mill criminals. We're talking enhanced mercenaries, experimental tech, the works. If we're going to pull this off, we'll need to work together. Clevessa's expression didn't soften. We'll see. Ian sighed and downed the rest of his drink. This is gonna be fun, isn't it? Define fun. Not dying horribly? Her lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, but she quickly masked it. Then I suggest you follow my lead, human. I have no intention of dying because of your incompetence. Ian stood, adjusting his jacket. Incompetence? I'll have you know, I graduated top of my class in survival tactics. I can even make a fire with 2 sticks and a lot of swearing. Clevessa didn't respond, already walking toward the exit. Ian hurried to catch up, his footsteps echoing alongside hers. I can see we're going to get along great, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Keep up, was her only reply. As they boarded their stolen freighter and prepared to embark on their mission, Ian couldn't help but smile. He'd dealt with difficult partners before, but Clevessa Rowe was something else entirely. And Clevessa? For all her irritation, she couldn't quite shake the feeling that this human might surprise her yet. The freighter they'd acquired for the mission was a patchwork monstrosity, a testament to human ingenuity and recklessness. The ship's hull was an amalgamation of salvaged panels, its engines a mismatched pair that rumbled unevenly as they pushed the vessel into hyperspace. Clevessa Rowe paced the cramped cockpit, her armored boots clanging against the grated floor. She cast a disdainful glance at Ian Travers, who sat at the pilot's console with 1 foot propped up and a half-eaten ration bar in his hand. Do you ever stop eating? She asked, her tone laced with irritation. Ian looked up, his mouth full. You've got to fuel the machine, Rowe. My body's a temple. She eyed his wiry frame skeptically. A temple of what? Poor decisions and sugar? Ian grinned, undeterred. You're funny when you're angry, you know that? Clevessa crossed her arms, unimpressed. Focus on the mission, human. We're not here to exchange pleasantries. Pleasantries? Ian leaned back in his chair, gesturing around the cockpit. Lady, this ship barely qualifies as a functioning death trap. If we don't make it to the asteroid belt, exchanging pleasantries might be the last thing we ever do. She didn't dignify that with a response, instead turning her attention to the holographic map projected above the navigation console. Their destination was a notorious black market hub nestled within the dense asteroid field known as the Veil. The Arkenstone had been traced there, and Clevessa intended to retrieve it with or without Ian's cooperation. What's the plan? Ian asked, breaking the silence. I infiltrate the hub, locate the artifact, and neutralize any threats. You stay out of my way. Ian raised an eyebrow. Neutralize? That's a fancy way of saying stab everything that moves, isn't it? If necessary, she replied. Deadpan. He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Look, I get that you're some kind of super soldier, but this place isn't just about muscle. You'll need finesse, diplomacy. I don't do diplomacy. I noticed. Ian smirked, then leaned forward, his expression turning serious for the first time. Listen, the Veil isn't like the battlefields you're used to. These people will spot a Thraxian warrior a mile away. If you go in swinging, you'll blow our cover before we even get close to the Arkenstone. Clevessa regarded him coolly. And what do you suggest? Simple, he said, standing and grabbing a tattered duffel bag from the floor. From it, he pulled out a mismatched set of clothes, a gaudy jacket, patched pants, and a ridiculous hat adorned with feathers. We blend in. Clevessa stared at the outfit, then at Ian. You cannot be serious. Dead serious. He tossed the jacket in her direction, which she caught with one hand, holding it as though it might be contagious. "I am a Thraxian warrior," she said, her voice sharp. "I will not debase myself with this mockery." Ian shrugged. "Your call, but if you march in there looking like a walking tank, you'll draw every gun in the room. This is about survival, not pride." She glared at him, her fingers tightening around the jacket. For a moment she considered tossing it back in his face, but he wasn't wrong. With great reluctance, she removed her armor piece by piece, leaving only her combat suit, a sleek black garment designed for both mobility and protection. Ian clapped his hands together. "Now we're getting somewhere. Just one more thing." He held up the hat. "No," she said flatly. The Veil was as chaotic as Ian had promised. The asteroid belt itself was a treacherous maze of tumbling rocks and hidden gravity wells, and navigating it required a level of skill that Clivessa grudgingly admitted Ian possessed. As they docked at the Black Market hub, a sprawling station carved into the heart of a massive asteroid, the true challenge began. The interior of the hub was a cacophony of sights and sounds. Traders hawking stolen goods, mercenaries bickering over contracts, and a pervasive smell of burning metal and unidentifiable alien spices. The station's lighting flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits. Clivessa followed Ian through the crowded marketplace, her every instinct screaming at her to remain alert. Her Thraxian training had honed her senses to a razor's edge, and the hub was a breeding ground for danger. Ian, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease. He navigated the throng with the casual confidence of someone who'd spent too much time in places like this, exchanging pleasantries and jokes with anyone who crossed his path. At one stall, he bartered for information with a lizard-like vendor who seemed more interested in Ian's hat than his credits. "Nice feathers," the vendor hissed. "Thanks," Ian replied, tipping the hat. "It's all the rage on Earth. You should see the matching boots." Clivessa rolled her eyes but stayed silent, letting Ian do the talking. Eventually, their search led them to a dimly lit cantina where the artifact was rumored to have been seen. The place was packed with a mix of species, most of whom looked like they'd sell their own mothers for a handful of credits. Ian approached the bar, ordering a drink that smelled suspiciously like engine coolant. Clivessa stood beside him, her gaze sweeping the room. "We've got company," she murmured, nodding toward a table in the corner where a group of armed mercenaries sat watching them. Ian didn't look, instead taking a long sip of his drink. "Relax, Ro. You're overthinking it." "Overthinking?" she repeated, incredulous. "Yeah. Look intimidating, but not too intimidating, like you could snap their necks but won't unless they ask nicely." Before she could retort, one of the mercenaries stood and approached them, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. "You two look out of place," he said, his voice a low growl. Ian turned, his easygoing smile firmly in place. "Do we? Because I was just telling my wife here how cozy this place feels. Right, honey?" Clivessa froze, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "Wife?" Ian grinned. "Play along." Clivessa's lips tightened, but she stepped closer to Ian, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, dear. It's lovely." The mercenary frowned, his eyes darting between them. "You don't look like smugglers." "We're on vacation," Ian said cheerfully. "Romantic getaway. You know, exotic locales, questionable hygiene, life-threatening danger, everything a couple could want." The mercenary stared at him, clearly unsure whether to laugh or draw his weapon. After a tense moment, he muttered something under his breath and returned to his table. As soon as he was out of earshot, Clivessa stepped away from Ian, her expression cold enough to freeze stars. "If you ever call me your wife again, I will end you." Ian chuckled, raising his drink in mock toast. Noted. Despite her irritation, Clivessa couldn't deny that his approach had worked. For now they'd avoided suspicion. But the mission was far from over, and the Arkenstone remained tantalizingly out of reach. The cantina's noise faded into a background hum as Ian and Clivessa moved deeper into the underbelly of the hub. Ian, still riding high from his improvised romantic getaway ploy, had a spring in his step. Clavessa, on the other hand, was simmering with barely contained irritation. "Let me guess," Ian said, glancing at her as they descended a grimy staircase. "You don't have a sense of humor because Thraxian boot camp beats it out of you, right?" Clavessa didn't answer immediately. Her focus was on the narrow corridor ahead, her eyes scanning for threats. "Humor is a distraction," she said finally. "Distractions get you killed." "See, that's where we differ," Ian replied. "I think humor keeps you alive, keeps you sane." She stopped, turning to face him. "Do you ever take anything seriously?" His grin faltered for a moment, replaced by something softer. "More than you think." Before Clavessa could respond, a voice crackled through the comm unit embedded in her wrist. It was a distorted transmission from one of the station's many illicit networks, broadcasting details about upcoming auctions, bounties, and other underground dealings. "The artifact known as the Arkenstone will be on display in Sector 7's auction hall. Bidding begins in 1 hour. Entry requires valid credentials." Clavessa and Ian exchanged a glance. "Well," Ian said, rubbing his hands together, "that simplifies things. All we have to do is outbid a room full of cutthroats, warlords, and megalomaniacs. Easy." "Do you have any valid credentials?" Clavessa asked. Ian hesitated. "Define valid." Her glare was answer enough. Sector 7 was the most heavily fortified area of the hub. Its entrance was guarded by a pair of hulking android sentinels, their metallic frames gleaming under the flickering overhead lights. Clavessa and Ian watched from a distance, concealed behind a stack of shipping crates. "We need a plan," Clavessa said, her voice low. Ian tapped his chin thoughtfully. "How about we bribe the guards with the universal currency of friendship and charm?" Her expression didn't change. "I'll handle this." Wait, Ian said, grabbing her arm before she could move. "No offense, but your version of handling things usually involves violence, and that's going to attract attention. Do you have a better idea?" He pulled a small device from his pocket, a holographic forgery unit. "We make our own credentials." Clavessa raised an eyebrow. "You carry a forgery device?" "I like to call it a creative solutions generator." She stared at him, unimpressed. "And you didn't mention this earlier because I didn't want to ruin the surprise." Ian activated the device, its small projector casting a faint glow as it scanned the credentials of a passing trader. Within seconds, the forgery unit produced a convincing replica. "Voila," Ian said, holding up the fake ID. 2 passes to the hottest auction in the Vale. Clavessa inspected the forgery, her sharp eyes scrutinizing every detail. "If this fails, I'll blame you." "If this fails," Ian countered, "we'll be too dead for blame." The auction hall was a study in controlled chaos. The room was packed with a motley assortment of species, each more intimidating than the last. Hulking reptilian merchants, sleekly armored bounty hunters, and shadowy figures draped in cloaks all crowded the space, their voices a low murmur of scheming and greed. A stage dominated the center of the room, its platform lit by harsh spotlights. The Arkenstone sat at its heart, encased in a translucent energy shield. The artifact was smaller than Clavessa had expected, no larger than a human fist, but its presence was undeniable. It pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow, as if the universe itself acknowledged its significance. Clavessa's attention was fixed on the artifact, but Ian couldn't help scanning the crowd. "So, quick question," he said, keeping his voice low. "If things go south, how many of these people do you think you can take in a fight?" "All of them," she replied without hesitation. Ian smirked. "Good to know." A gong sounded, silencing the room. A slender alien with elongated limbs and a voice like crushed glass stepped onto the stage, its translator device projecting the words in Standard Galactic. "Welcome, esteemed guests. Let the bidding begin." The numbers started low, but climbed quickly. Traders barked their offers, their bids escalating into sums that made Ian's head spin. "Do we even have money?" Ian whispered. Clavessa didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the artifact, her mind racing. She wasn't here to win an auction. She was here to complete the mission, by any means necessary. As the bids soared past any reasonable limit, Clavessa subtly reached for the small EMP device hidden in her sleeve. Ian noticed and frowned. "What's the plan, Ro?" "Distraction," she murmured. "Your distractions usually involve explosions, don't they?" Before she could answer, the room erupted in chaos. A group of heavily armed mercenaries burst through the side entrance, their weapons trained on the crowd. "This auction is over," their leader growled. "The Arkenstone belongs to the Crimson Order now." Ian groaned. Of course, because this wasn't complicated enough already. Clavessa didn't wait for orders. She moved with the precision of a predator, her combat training kicking in. In one fluid motion, she activated the EMP device, plunging the room into darkness as the energy shield around the Arkenstone flickered and died. "Move!" she barked, grabbing Ian's arm and dragging him toward the stage. "Remind me to thank you later," he muttered, stumbling after her. The two of them reached the artifact just as the emergency lights flickered on, casting the room in a dim red glow. Clavessa snatched the Arkenstone, its strange energy thrumming against her palm. "Now what?" Ian asked, his voice tinged with panic. "Now," she said, shoving the artifact into a secure compartment on her suit. "We run." Blaster fire erupted around them as they sprinted toward the exit, weaving through the chaos. Ian fired his sidearm over his shoulder, covering their retreat, while Clavessa led the charge with ruthless efficiency. "This is your idea of a distraction?" Ian shouted. "It worked, didn't it?" she shot back. They burst into the station's corridors, their path twisting and turning as they evaded their pursuers. "Next time," Ian panted, "I'm picking the plan." "Next time," Clavessa replied, "you're staying on the ship." Despite the danger, Ian couldn't suppress a grin. She might be infuriating, but she was also undeniably effective. And he realized with a jolt, she was starting to grow on him. The corridors of the Vale blurred into a confusing labyrinth as Clavessa and Ian sprinted through them. Blaster fire sizzled against the walls, leaving blackened scorch marks that reeked of burnt metal. Behind them, the shouts of their pursuers echoed like a chorus of doom. "Do you even know where we're going?" Ian yelled over the din, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Out!" Clavessa replied tersely, her pace never faltering. "Out is a great plan," Ian shot back. "Except for the part where this station is crawling with homicidal maniacs, and we have, zero backup." "I am the backup," Clavessa snapped, her eyes scanning ahead for the faint blue glow of an access panel. Ian dodged a stray bolt that seared past his shoulder. That's a comforting thought. As they turned a corner, Clavessa spotted what she was looking for, a maintenance hatch leading to the station's lower levels. She gestured sharply, and Ian didn't hesitate, scrambling toward it as she covered their retreat. The hatch was small, designed for maintenance drones rather than humanoids, and Ian barely managed to squeeze through. "You could have warned me this was a tight fit," he grumbled. "Would it have helped?" Clavessa retorted, ducking inside and slamming the hatch shut behind her. She activated the manual locking mechanism, and the sounds of pursuit grew muffled. For a moment, the only noise was their heavy breathing and the faint hum of the station's machinery. Ian leaned against the wall, clutching his knees. "Okay, quick question. On a scale of 1 to we're definitely going to die, how bad is this situation?" Clavessa tilted her head, considering. "Closer to we're probably going to die." "Great. I love optimism." At the lower levels of the station were a stark contrast to the bustling hub above. Dimly lit and strewn with debris, the maintenance tunnels were a maze of twisting passages and half-forgotten machinery. The air was thick with the smell of oil and ozone, and every step echoed ominously. Ian glanced around uneasily. "This place feels like a horror movie set. If a killer robot jumps out, I'm blaming you." Clavessa ignored him, focusing on the faint vibrations underfoot. They needed to find a way to the docking bay without drawing more attention. "You're really good at ignoring me, you know that?" Ian continued, his voice a little too loud for comfort. "Years of practice," she muttered. "Let me guess," he said, following close behind. "Your Thraxian pals weren't big on small talk, huh? All business? All the time?" Clavessa stopped abruptly, and Ian nearly collided with her. She turned, her sharp features illuminated by the dim glow of the tunnel's emergency lights. "My pals, as you call them, valued discipline and efficiency. Conversation was a luxury we couldn't afford." Ian studied her for a moment, his usual smirk replaced by a thoughtful expression. "Sounds lonely." She turned away, her tone cold. "Focus on the mission." "Touché," Ian muttered under his breath. After what felt like an eternity of winding through the tunnels, they finally reached a junction marked with faded signs. Clavessa traced her fingers over the symbols, her alien script translating effortlessly in her mind. "This way," she said, gesturing toward a narrower passage. Ian hesitated. "You sure? That looks like the kind of place where monsters lurk. Would you prefer to face the mercenaries upstairs?" "Fair point," he conceded, following her. The passage opened into a cavernous chamber filled with ancient machinery, pipes crisscrossed overhead, dripping an unidentifiable liquid, and the floor was littered with discarded parts. In the center of the room was a large console, its screen flickering with static. "Looks like we've hit the jackpot," Ian said, approaching the console. "This thing's connected to the station's systems. Maybe we can find a way to—" His words were cut off by a sudden surge of static. The console's screen cleared, revealing the holographic image of a droid. Its glowing eyes blinked twice before it spoke in a metallic voice. "Unauthorized access detected. State your purpose." Ian froze. Sightseeing?" Clavessa shoved him aside, her fingers flying across the console's controls. "We need access to the docking bay. Override security protocols." The droid's image flickered. "Request denied. Intruders will be neutralized." Ian backed away as a series of metallic clicks echoed through the chamber. From the shadows emerged a pair of maintenance droids, their once benign designs now outfitted with makeshift weaponry. "Great," Ian said, pulling his blaster. "Killer robots. Called it." Clavessa didn't waste time. She launched herself at the nearest droid, her movements a blur of precision. Her combat knife found its mark, severing a vital cable as the droid collapsed in a shower of sparks. Ian aimed for the second droid, his shots ricocheting off its armored plating. "Any tips on where to shoot these things?" "Try aiming," Clavessa retorted, finishing off her opponent. "Helpful as always." The second droid lunged at Ian, its clawed appendage swiping dangerously close. He ducked, firing a desperate shot that struck the droid's sensor array. With a sputtering whine, it toppled over, lifeless. "See, I aimed," Ian said, flashing a grin. Clavessa ignored him, turning back to the console. The droid's holographic image was gone, replaced by a schematic of the station. "There," she said, highlighting a route to the docking bay. "This will get us out." Ian peered over her shoulder. "And let me guess, half of it's probably guarded by more of those murder bots?" "Possibly." "Fantastic. Lead the way, fearless leader." As they made their way toward the docking bay, the tension between them began to ease. Despite the danger, Ian found himself cracking jokes, and Clavessa, much to her own surprise, felt her icy demeanor thawing, if only slightly. "You know," Ian said as they approached the final corridor, "for someone who doesn't like people, you're surprisingly good at keeping me alive." "Don't let it go to your head," she replied. Too late. They reached the docking bay without further incident, the sight of their ramshackle freighter a welcome relief. As they boarded the ship and prepared to leave the Veil behind, Ian couldn't resist one last comment. "So, what's next? Dinner and a movie? Maybe a nice asteroid cruise?" Clavessa shot him a withering look, but couldn't suppress the faintest hint of a smirk. "Just get us out of here, human." With a dramatic salute, Ian fired up the engines, the ship lurching into motion as they escaped the chaos of the veil. For the first time, Clavessa allowed herself to relax, if only a little. The mission was far from over, but for now, they'd survived. And despite her initial doubts, she couldn't deny that Ian's presence had made the impossible slightly more bearable. The freighter hummed as it slipped into the inky void of space, its patchwork hull creaking faintly with every slight course adjustment. Ian lounged in the co-pilot's chair, boots propped up on the console, as he munched on what looked like a dubious protein bar. "So," he began, mouth half full, "what's the next step in this grand, probably suicidal plan of ours?" Clavessa didn't look up from the navigation panel. "The Arkenstone is only one part of the puzzle. We need coordinates to decode its energy signature." "Right," Ian said, tossing the wrapper onto the floor. Because treasure hunting through hostile space wasn't exciting enough without riddles. Clavessa cast him a sideways glance. "Do you ever stop talking?" He grinned. "Wouldn't you miss me if I did?" Her silence was answer enough, though Ian was convinced he caught the faintest flicker of amusement in her sharp eyes. The coordinates they needed were rumored to be held by a reclusive trader named Zurix, whose reputation for paranoia was matched only by his exorbitant prices. His last known location was an asteroid cluster on the fringe of Threxian-controlled space, a risky detour but a necessary one. As they approached the cluster, Ian leaned forward in his chair, eyes widening at the sight of Zurix's base. The asteroid was a marvel of engineering, its jagged surface covered with intricate latticework of reinforced metal and glowing conduits. A fleet of automated turrets bristled along the perimeter, tracking their every move. "Friendly place," Ian said, giving a low whistle. "I bet the welcome mat's booby-trapped." Clavessa ignored him, focusing on the docking sequence. "Keep your comments to yourself. Zurix doesn't take kindly to humor." "Noted," Ian replied, though the smirk on his face suggested he had no intention of staying quiet. Zurix's lair was as strange as its owner. The interior was a chaotic mix of cluttered workstations, ancient artifacts, and piles of salvaged technology. Zurix himself was even stranger, an insectoid being with an iridescent exoskeleton that shimmered in the low light. He scuttled toward them on 4 spindly legs, his mandibles clicking with barely concealed irritation. "You're late," Zurix hissed, his voice filtered through a translator. "Didn't realize we were on a schedule," Ian quipped. Zurix's compound eyes narrowed. "And you brought a human, how quaint." Clavessa stepped forward, her tone sharp. "We need the coordinates to access the Arkenstone's energy signature. Name your price." Zurix clicked his mandibles, circling them like a predator sizing up its prey. "The price is steep. Do you have something worth trading?" Ian reached into his jacket and pulled out a small dented flask. "How about this? Authentic Terran whiskey, rare vintage." Zurix stopped, his antennae twitching. "Whiskey?" Ian nodded solemnly. "Straight from Earth, aged to perfection." Clavessa shot him a look that could have vaporized a lesser being, but Zurix seemed intrigued. "I will consider this offering," Zurix said, snatching the flask. He unscrewed the cap and took a cautious sip, his mandibles clicking with surprise. "It's acceptable," he admitted grudgingly. Ian leaned toward Clavessa, whispering, "See? Charm wins again." "Don't push your luck," she muttered. Zurix led them to a holographic terminal, its screen flickering to life with a map of uncharted space. He pointed to a set of coordinates marked by a faint pulse of light. "This is where you'll find what you seek," Zurix said. "But be warned, the region is unstable. Few who venture there return." "Fantastic," Ian said, clapping his hands. "Unstable regions and a high chance of death. Just another Tuesday." Ignoring him, Clavessa memorized the coordinates and turned to Zurix. Our business is concluded. Zurix clicked his mandibles, a sound that might have been laughter. Oh, not quite. Before either of them could react, the walls of the lair shimmered and disappeared, revealing a squad of armed Thraxian soldiers. Ian groaned. Why is it always Thraxians? Clavessa's hand went to her weapon, but Zurix raised a clawed appendage. Do not bother. The turrets are already locked on your ship. Surrender the Arkenstone, and I might let you leave with your lives. Clavessa glared at him, her mind racing. She could take out a few soldiers, but the odds were stacked against them. Ian, meanwhile, was already thinking aloud. Okay, so Plan A is fighting our way out. What's Plan B? Clavessa didn't answer. Instead, she activated a small device hidden on her wrist. A moment later, the freighter's engines roared to life, the sound reverberating through the lair. Zurix's eyes widened. What did you... Before he could finish, the freighter's automated defense systems unleashed a barrage of suppressing fire, creating just enough chaos for Clavessa and Ian to act. Plan B it is, Ian shouted, diving for cover as blaster bolts filled the air. The escape was a blur of frantic action. Clavessa moved with lethal precision, taking down soldiers with a combination of speed and cunning. Ian, for his part, managed to hold his own, though his method was less elegant and more about running and shooting wildly. By the time they reached the freighter, the base was in shambles, smoke and sparks filling the air. As the ship's ramp closed behind them, Ian collapsed into the nearest chair, panting. Remind me to never bargain with insectoid maniacs again. Clavessa set the ship on autopilot and turned to him, her expression unreadable. You handled yourself better than expected. Is that your way of saying thanks? Don't push it. As the freighter hurtled toward the uncharted coordinates, Ian couldn't help but glance at Clavessa. There was something different about her, a slight softening around the edges, though her demeanor was as steely as ever. So, he said, breaking the silence, what happens when we find whatever it is we're looking for? Clavessa didn't answer immediately. She stared out at the stars, her gaze distant. We complete the mission. And after that? She turned to him, her eyes narrowing. Why do you ask so many questions? Ian grinned. Because one of us has to keep things interesting. For a moment, he thought she might actually smile. Instead, she simply shook her head and returned to the console. Get some rest, human. The next part won't be any easier. Ian leaned back, his grin fading into a thoughtful expression. Despite her sharp edges and unyielding demeanor, he was starting to see glimpses of something deeper. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he found himself wanting to see more. The freighter drifted into the uncharted expanse, its exterior battered from a dozen near-death experiences, yet somehow still holding together. Outside the cockpit, the stars seemed dimmer here, their light distorted by the dense, shifting field of debris. The coordinates Zurix had provided led to the epicenter of this galactic graveyard, an area that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Okay, this place is officially creepy, Ian said, peering out the window. Are stars supposed to look like they're having an identity crisis? It's the effect of gravimetric instability, Clavessa replied, not looking up from the controls. The region is riddled with collapsed star fragments and subspace anomalies. Translation: we're flying into a giant blender. Clavessa's hands moved deftly over the console, adjusting the freighter's shields to compensate for the chaotic energy. If you're that concerned, feel free to leave. Ian leaned back in his chair, grinning. And miss the chance to watch you work your magic? Not a chance. Navigating the field was like threading a needle while blindfolded. Shards of crystalline debris floated past, glowing faintly with residual energy. Every so often, a pulse would ripple through the field, sending the fragments spiraling in unpredictable patterns. Ian watched as Clavessa piloted the ship with a precision that bordered on supernatural. You know, you're scarily good at this. Do Thraxians take flight classes in, like, Kindergartens or something? Clavessa's lips twitched, though she didn't look at him. We're trained to master every skill necessary for survival. Flying through chaos fields is just one of them. Well, remind me to never challenge you to a game of space darts. The ship jolted suddenly as a surge of energy swept through the field. Ian grabbed the armrests, his grin replaced by wide-eyed panic. What was that? Did we just hit something, or did something hit us? Calm down, Clavessa said, though her tone was sharper than usual. She adjusted the stabilizers, her gaze focused on the readings flashing across the console. The anomalies are becoming more frequent. We're close. Close to what? Certain death? Clavessa didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to the viewport. There. Ian followed her gaze and felt his breath catch. In the center of the field was a structure unlike anything he'd ever seen. A massive, jagged formation that seemed to pulse with its own light. It was shaped like an enormous fractured sphere, its surface covered in glowing runes and strange angular patterns. Wow, Ian said, his voice barely above a whisper. What is that? The conduit, Clavessa replied. Ian glanced at her. You've seen this before? Only in fragments of intelligence reports, she admitted. It's said to be a remnant of a lost civilization, a gateway to untold power. Ian whistled. Well, that's reassuring. Let's hope it's not also a gateway to, doom. As they approached the conduit, the ship's systems began to flicker. The closer they got, the more the energy readings spiked, until alarms blared across the cockpit. Shields are failing, Ian reported, his fingers flying over the controls. If we get any closer, this tin can is going to disintegrate. We don't have a choice, Clavessa said, her tone resolute. The Arkenstone's energy signature matches the conduit's resonance. Whatever we're looking for is inside. Ian sighed. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? With a final burst of power, the freighter slipped through a breach in the conduit's outer shell, landing with a jarring thud on a platform that seemed to materialize beneath them. The cockpit lights dimmed as the ship powered down, leaving only the eerie glow of the conduit's interior to illuminate their surroundings. Ian unbuckled his harness and stood stretching. Well, that was fun. What's next? Giant space spiders? Killer holograms? Stay alert, Clavessa said, already moving toward the exit. Noted, Ian muttered, following her. The interior of the conduit was even more surreal than its exterior. The walls were made of an iridescent material that shifted colors as they walked, and the floor was covered in intricate patterns that seemed to pulse in time with their footsteps. Strange otherworldly sounds echoed through the space, like whispers just out of reach. This place is giving me serious haunted spaceship vibes, Ian said, his voice low. Focus, Clavessa said, scanning the area with her handheld device. The Arkenstone's resonance is strongest this way. They moved deeper into the structure, the air growing colder with each step. Ian couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though every time he turned around, there was nothing there. Okay, seriously, he said, his voice a little louder. Is it just me, or does this place feel like it's alive? It's not alive, Clavessa said, though her tone wasn't entirely convincing. But it's not inert either. Well, that's comforting. They reached a chamber at the heart of the conduit, its walls lined with towering columns of light. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and atop it rested the Arkenstone. Ian let out a low whistle. There it is, the source of all our troubles. As they approached, the Arkenstone began to glow, its light intensifying until the entire chamber was bathed in a golden hue. Careful, Clavessa warned, her eyes narrowing. Ian raised his hands. Hey, I'm not touching it. Last thing I need is to trigger some ancient curse. Clavessa stepped forward cautiously, her movements precise. When she reached the pedestal, she hesitated for a moment before placing her hands on either side of the Arkenstone. The chamber trembled, and the columns of light flared brightly. Ian stumbled back, shielding his eyes. What's happening? He shouted. The conduit is activating, Clavessa replied, her voice calm despite the chaos. As the trembling subsided, a holographic projection appeared above the Arkenstone, a map of the galaxy, with a single point highlighted in crimson. Ian squinted at the projection. "What's that?" "The next step," Clavessa said, a hint of something, determination, in her voice. Before Ian could ask more, the chamber's walls began to shift, revealing a series of pathways leading deeper into the conduit. "Looks like we're not done yet," Ian said, his grin returning despite himself. Clavessa turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Stay close." For once, Ian didn't argue. Whatever lay ahead, he had the distinct feeling they were going to need each other to survive it. The pathways beyond the chamber twisted and branched like veins, glowing faintly as Clavessa and Ian made their way deeper into the conduit. The Arkenstone, now pulsing rhythmically in Clavessa's hands, seemed to guide their steps, its glow intensifying whenever they chose the correct path. Ian wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, glancing at the alien walls around them. "So, what are the odds this thing doesn't lead us straight into an alien death trap?" Clavessa didn't slow her pace. "If you're so concerned, turn around. And miss out on all the excitement? Never," Ian said, grinning. The humor, while light-hearted, masked the tension they both felt. Every sound, every flicker of light in the conduit seemed to whisper of untold danger, but something else simmered beneath the surface, an understanding, unspoken but tangible, that they were no longer just two strangers forced into cooperation. The corridor opened into a massive chamber, its ceiling vanishing into darkness. In the center stood a towering structure, a spire of crystalline material that pulsated with energy. The air was thick with power, vibrating through their bodies as if the conduit itself was alive. Clavessa approached cautiously, holding the Arkenstone in front of her. As she drew closer, the spire began to react, sending out ripples of light that cascaded across the room. "So what now?" Ian asked, staying a few steps behind her. "Do we plug it in, or is there a secret handshake I should know about?" Clavessa gave him a withering look. "Stay back. This might not be stable." Ian smirked. "You say that like it's going to stop me." As Clavessa placed the Arkenstone into a depression on the spire's surface, the chamber roared to life. The walls shimmered with cascading patterns of light, and the spire emitted a deep hum that resonated through their bones. Then, a holographic figure appeared, a being of pure light, its form shifting between humanoid and abstract. "Welcome, Seekers," the figure said, its voice echoing in their minds. "You have awakened the conduit." "Yeah, great," Ian said, raising his hand like a schoolboy with a question. "But can you tell us why we just risked our lives flying through a cosmic minefield to get here?" The figure's glowing face seemed to shift, almost as if it were amused. "The conduit is a repository of knowledge and power, created to guide those worthy of its secrets." Clavessa stepped forward, her voice steady. "We came for answers. The Arkenstone's energy signature, it led us here. Why?" "Because it is part of the conduit," the figure replied. "Together they unlock the pathway to rebuilding what has been lost. But the path is not without cost." Ian raised an eyebrow. "Great. There's always a catch." The figure explained that the conduit was built by an ancient civilization that sought to harness the fabric of the universe itself, but their ambition led to their downfall, leaving the conduit as both a warning and a gift. It could grant unparalleled power, but only to those who proved themselves worthy by demonstrating unity and trust, qualities the ancient builders had failed to uphold. As the figure spoke, Ian glanced at Clavessa. She stood tall, her expression unreadable, but he could see the weight of the moment in her eyes. "So," Ian said, breaking the silence, "does that mean we passed the test? Or is there a final boss we need to fight first?" The figure's form shimmered. "The test is not one of combat, but of choice. The conduit can reshape worlds or destroy them. Its power is yours to wield, if you believe you can bear the responsibility." Clavessa turned to Ian, her gaze intense. "This is bigger than us. Bigger than the mission." Ian nodded, his usual humor absent for once. "Yeah, no pressure or anything." They exchanged a long look, the unspoken bond between them stronger than ever. For Clavessa, the decision was a moment of reckoning, not just for her people, but for herself. She had always seen the universe through the lens of distrust and survival, but now, standing here with Ian, she realized that strength came not just from isolation, but from connection. For Ian, the choice was simpler. He had always believed in hope, even when it seemed foolish. And somehow, despite the odds, he had found someone who shared that belief, even if she didn't know it yet. Clavessa placed her hand on the spire, her voice firm. "We choose to protect, to preserve. The power of the conduit must be used for creation, not destruction." The figure's light flared brightly, filling the chamber with warmth. "Then the conduit's legacy is safe in your hands." A surge of energy enveloped them, and the chamber began to dissolve. When the light faded, they were back on their freighter, the Arkenstone glowing faintly on the console. Ian blinked, looking around. "Okay, did we just get teleported, or did I hit my head again?" Clavessa allowed herself a small smile. "It seems the conduit has granted us a second chance." Ian grinned. "Well, that's a relief. For a moment I thought we were going to have to walk back." As they left the anomaly behind, the freighter's systems stabilized, and the stars returned to their normal brilliance. Ian sat in the co-pilot seat, watching Clavessa as she charted their course. "So," he said, leaning back with his usual grin, "what's next for the galaxy's unlikeliest duo?" Clavessa glanced at him, her expression softer than he'd ever seen. "We see where this takes us." Ian raised an eyebrow. "This? You mean the whole saving the universe thing, or—" She didn't answer directly, but the faint curve of her lips said more than words ever could. For the first time in a long time, Clavessa felt something unfamiliar yet welcome, a sense of hope. And as the freighter disappeared into the vast expanse of space, she realized she no longer faced the unknown alone. Together they were ready for whatever came next.